She'll be speaking. She's in Warsaw, helping with refugees.
We don't have much of a crowd to bring to order, but those of us who are here should do so. As always, it's not a question of quantity, it's a question of quality. Thank you all for being here. And thanks also to those joining us online from wherever they are. And I'll get to that in just a minute. As the Torah establishes, at least as far as I know, no protocols about how to proceed in terms of welcoming and thanking and introducing people, I would like to begin by introducing very briefly the person who's here on the largest format possible, Magda Dorosh, who's coming to us via her home in Warsaw, and of course our other featured guest speaker, Andy Fedinsky, who's to my left. I'll say more about each of them before I begin my discussion with them. Suffice it to say that if we wanted to get two grizzled veterans of the humanitarian relief effort to address, to inform, and inspire us, I think we achieved at getting Team A. So, my name is John Dunn. My wife Leslie and I are longtime members of this congregation. I'm here now at the request of the Social Action Committee to lead today's discussion, the goal of which is, as I've already indicated, to inform and inspire. I would like to begin the round of thank yous by saying thank you to Faith Schaefer, the head of the Social Action Committee, who is indeed the inspirational force behind this program, and of course to Jen Mendelson, Kathy Sebo, and James and Dave, who are hiding behind a door and accomplishing behind the scenes the technical wizardry that allows all this to be live streamed, and for Magda to join us in such an elegant fashion. I'd like to say a special welcome to Rabbis Miriam Klimova and Alexander Duchovny, two Reform Ukrainian rabbis now tending to communities in Haifa, where I met with them 3 weeks ago, and who told me they were planning to join via the live stream. I would say that Rabbi Miriam, who's finishing her studies at HUC in Jerusalem, is one of those people I've met who gives me real hope for the future of the Reform movement. And Rabbi Duchovny, known as Rad, has a connection to this synagogue because he was ordained by our own Rabbi Rick Bloch many years ago. Before we get to Magda and Andy in detail, let me try to address the why and the what of this program. The what is very simple. I'm going to speak with Andy and Magda for about 45 minutes in a semi-rehearsed Q&A format, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience to ask questions of them, all with a focus of what can you do to help? That leaves the why. Since the war began in February, and of course many, perhaps including Andy, would argue with good reason the war began well before February, it has been subject to the vicissitudes of the news cycle, whether it's the geopolitical thrust or the military thrust. It's on the front page above the fold one day and on the back pages on the next day, and maybe some days not on any page. And that sort of masks one harsh reality. Since the war began, millions of people have suffered displacement, whether those people remain in Ukraine, whether they are among the millions who crossed the border into Poland or other neighboring regions, or whether they have come to Cleveland, and I'm told that more than 100 Ukrainian students joined the Parma school system alone during the course of the opening of this school year. Their suffering is immense. Their needs are even larger. And if there's any silver cloud, silver lining in the very, very dark cloud of this war, it is the immense effort on behalf of these displaced and suffering Ukrainians engaged in by the Ukrainian diaspora, by the Jewish world here and in Poland, by the Polish citizens, and by the world in general. So we have, as I've said, two frontline veterans of this enormous effort to provide humanitarian relief, and we look forward to hearing from them about what has been involved so far in providing that relief, and some other historical context along the way. I'm going to begin our discussion with Magda. Magda, I'm really sorry my back is to you. That is so thoroughly impolite. And yet I'm told that is not relevant to you because you can't see me in any event, and you're looking at the audience and I'm looking at the stream, and that's the technical wizardry that makes all of this work. I did not know Magda until I made my first visit to Warsaw, where I made several trips during the course of this year to be a volunteer at the Warsaw Central Station. Magda is a native of Wrocław. She grew up celebrating Christmas because, like many Jews, her family in the post-war Soviet era hid their Jewish identity. That began to change one day when Magda made a thoroughly unauthorized trip into a closet in her house and began to discover something about her Jewish identity. And from that secretive and humble beginning, Magda has become not just an active and proud Jew, but indeed a leader of the Jewish community in Poland. And I can say that by virtue of having seen her in action during my visits with her over the past few months. Her main job now is to run Hillel in Warsaw. And so, Magda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Good. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think maybe I'd like to start by saying we in the U.S. have a certain image of what Hillel means, which is a bit different than what the reality is in Poland. So could you please give us some insight into how Hillel operates in Poland?
Certainly. So Hillel in Poland, as well as in other European countries, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, because I can hear some echo back here. But anyway, Hillels in Europe are operated what is called a community-based Hillel, meaning not affiliated to any given university, but working mostly with the community, allowing students from all the universities in the city come and be engaged by our work. The other difference is that we're working with not only the students, but also with young adults, meaning with the age group of about 18 to about 30. The significant difference between our Hillel and other Hillels in Europe or elsewhere is the fact that about 70% of our participants did not know about their Jewish roots when growing up. So they would find out about their Jewish roots at some point as teenagers or even in their 20s or early 30s, and try to make an understanding and find a meaning in what it means for them personally to understand that their family was Jewish, that their grandparents were Jewish, and how that influences their today's life. Therefore, our goal is to ultimately strengthen their personal Jewish identity so that they can carry on to future generations.
So, how many members or active participants in Hillel are there in Warsaw and in Krakow?
So on a yearly basis, we work with about 250 students, which is about a third of the estimated Jewish community of Warsaw. Mm-hmm. In terms of young adults, obviously.
All right, I'd like to now take the great risk of zooming out to look at the biggest picture that we discussed in our semi-rehearsal. I think everybody knows that more than 3 million Polish Jews were exterminated during the Holocaust. And that reflects what, for the 20th century, was a very bad period for Jews in Poland. And how's that for a classic understatement? But what I'd like to focus on is not the negative of that, tragic as it is, but the fact that in the pre-war years, there were more than 3 million Jews who lived in Poland, more than 10 times the number of Jews that lived in France, which was the second most, had the second largest Jewish population in the pre-war era. Can you give us some insight as to why so many millions of Jews ended up in Poland?
Certainly, and I'll try to do it as briefly as possible, because I think it is a very interesting and important question to answer, why Jews were in Poland in the first place. So Jews were present in Poland for over 1,000 years before the Second World War broke out. They were present since the beginning of the Polish state, which was formed in 10th century. In 1264, then King Bolesław the Pious issued what is called today a Statute of Kalisz, which was the first legal document, generally a charter of Jewish liberties in Poland, that established a legal foundation for the Jewish presence in Poland, and that was the first such document in Europe, which allowed the Jews to thrive, to work, to run businesses in Poland, which they were not allowed before. The period of 16th to 18th century was the period of the Polish history where Poland and Lithuania formed one commonwealth. That time was called the Paradisus Judaeorum, a golden age for Jewish life in Poland and Lithuania. That commonwealth became the center of the Ashkenazic world in Europe, with thriving and growing Jewish communities where yeshivot were opened, literature and culture was blooming, and Poland was the place where Hasidism and later Haskalah were born. By 1795, Poland, as a result of 3 partitions between Prussia, Russia, and Austria, ceased to exist and was erased from the maps until 1918. By the end of 19th century, roughly 80% of world Jewry lived in the partitioned lands of Poland. And I think this is an important fact to remember. Sort of what led later on to the Second World War was that very open, very welcoming territory to Jews that later on was partitioned, but that allowed for Jews to happily live in the area, on the territory of what used to be Poland. With the nationalistic movements getting stronger in the occupied Polish territories, the anti-Semitism and pogroms rose as well. On top of that, economic hardship forced a growing number of Jews to leave what used to be the Polish state. They left mostly for the US, Canada, and elsewhere, and it's estimated that about 1.5 million Jews left at that time. 1914 to 1918, Europe sees the First World War. By the end of this war, with the peace treaty, Poland regains its independence and is back on the map after 123 years, which for Poles is a very important moment. By 1930, the Jewish population worldwide was estimated at 15 million, with 3 million Jews living in Poland, as you mentioned, John. As we know, 1939, 1945, Second World War, the extermination of Jews was implemented in the occupied Polish territory by the Germans, as that was the largest European Jewish population. 90% of Polish Jews perished during the Shoah. The post-war times saw or brought to Poland shifts in its borders. Families needed to get relocated from eastern parts of Poland that were given up to the western parts of Poland that were called reclaimed territories. With the next few pogroms that took place in Poland after the war and the anti-Zionistic campaigns run by the Polish government, Jews started leaving Poland, and the mass emigration began in March 1968, where thousands of Jews left Poland while their Polish citizenship was revoked. Those who remained in Poland go underground and do not share anything about their Jewish roots to anyone, even their closest family members. The 80s in Poland bring solidarity movement, which was the beginning force for fighting for democracy in Poland and the fall of communism. Solidarity succeeds. In 1989, communism falls and Poland becomes a democratic country again. That change and that shift allows for Jews of Poland, those who decided to stay, to open up and start talking about their Jewish roots, come out of hiding. And that notion of discovering one's Jewish roots is still present in Poland today in 2022. Since the fall of communism, Poland is seeing the revival of Jewish communal life, and many new organizations being established all over the country, catering to the needs of Jews from all different walks of life and all different generations. And here we are today.
So, before we go to the humanitarian efforts at which you've been at the forefront, just one question to zoom back into real time. As you may recall, when I first came to visit you at the Hillel headquarters, I was shocked that I had to endure not a single security protocol to get in the door. And from that, I came to the conclusion that Jews in Poland must now feel, at some level at least, safe and secure. Is that an accurate impression?
Certainly. Certainly. Poland is a safe place for Jews, safer than, some would say, safer than France. Yes, there is anti-Semitism in Poland. It always has been here and probably will be here. But anti-Semitism in Poland is very vocal. It's not physical. Not a single Jew has been hurt or physically attacked in the last, basically since the fall of communism. What's happening in Poland is the general right-wing shift of the government, and Poland is not alone in that shift, unfortunately. Looking at other European countries or places outside of Europe, the government is right-leaning, putting the nationalistic narrative at at its core, at its center. And what that means is undermining the rule of law, undermining the justice system in Poland, which is unfortunately not independent anymore. It's the xenophobic statements, Poland for Poles, Poland for white Catholic Poles, which basically is against any sort of minority, not even to mention the Belarusian border crisis, where Putin and Lukashenko sent tens of thousands of people coming from Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, and who got stuck at the border because European Union, together with the Polish government, didn't want to let them in. And that crisis is going on for the last year.
So that,
Undermining.
let me use that as a springboard to draw the contrast between that experience where the Syrians and other refugees have been stuck in the forest on the Belarusian-Polish border under truly awful circumstances. And yet at the same time, we're talking about a country that massively opened its doors to millions of those fleeing the Ukraine. So let's take now a real deep focus on what the Polish people, what you and Hillel, what the Jewish world, from your observations, has been doing to provide humanitarian assistance, both to those who made it across the border and those who didn't.
Certainly. So since February 24th, 6.7 million Ukrainians came to Poland. One thing to remember and to understand, the Ukrainian-Polish border is basically the last border within the European Union. As the European Union operates on a Schengen rule, which means that there are no border checks between other European countries that are part of this treaty. Therefore, it doesn't mean that 6.7 million people came and stayed in Poland. They came to Poland, and majority of them moved to other countries in Europe, if not outside of Europe, going to Canada or the US. We can't really tell how many Ukrainians are in Poland at this time, but certainly millions of people found their new homes in Poland. It's estimated that in Warsaw itself, we have over 300,000 refugees. That's data based on
And what's being,
like the beginning of September.
What's being done for them, starting with what are you doing at Hillel, and then zoom out to talk about the broader community, both Jewish world and the Polish world?
Of course. So at Hillel, starting from the beginning of the war until today, the way we are supporting and helping the Ukrainian community in Poland has been changing and shifting. Our first response was opening a day center together with Taubi Center for Jewish Life in Warsaw. As we share an office space, which is quite a large space, we decided to turn that space into a day center where the refugees, which meant mostly mothers with their children, could come, could find safe haven, were served hot meal during the day. The kids had a playground area where they could play, where we were teaching Polish, having a therapist running therapy sessions with the Ukrainians, and the therapists being refugees themselves, saying, we want to help, we want to, we do feel such a strong need to help and be engaged in the help and support that is being provided for the Ukrainians. We've got the experience, let us work together, which we did. In July, number of Jewish organizations in Warsaw, including Hillel, the Taubi Center, JCC in Warsaw, the Office of the Chief Rabbi, the Jewish School, and the Jewish Community of Warsaw came together to create a summer day camp for the Jewish kids for the Ukrainian kids at the Jewish school in Warsaw. And again, important to mention, all our efforts were directed both at Jews and non-Jews. We weren't asking who is coming to the day center. We were not asking if the kids are Jewish or not Jewish when they were signing up for the day camp. We were openly acting as Jewish organizations. We weren't asking whom are we serving, as that's not what was important for us. What was important and still is important for us is being able to provide support for anyone who needs that support. So over the course of July, we had close to 100 kids that came through the summer day, the day camp during the summer. The kids had different classes, both math, Polish, English, arts and crafts, plenty of sports classes. They also were taken on excursions throughout Warsaw to get to know the city. Over the summer, Hillel, both in Warsaw and Krakow, as these are the two places where we operate, we decided to create what is called a welcome circle based on Hayas's know-how experience, which basically is an idea of engaging the local community into volunteer circles that work with a given refugee family to help them settle in the society where they're finding themselves in, to help them basically become self-sustainable and coming to the point where they would not need our help. On a larger scale, in terms of Jewish organizations in Poland, as of the second day of the war, Jewish organizations in Warsaw and Poland came together, creating what we called a crisis management center, which was, in a way, a first response to all the needs that the Ukrainians came to Poland with, starting from providing food, shelter, clothes, a place to sleep as they were crossing the border, then providing transportation to other places in Warsaw, in Poland, if not beyond Poland, finding accommodation for them in the places where they were finding themselves in. Warsaw, Krakow, Lublin, Łódź, Wrocław, Gdańsk, Gdynia. These are just the largest cities in Poland, also where the Jewish communities operate in Poland. We were providing them with accommodation, food, clothes, as many of the refugees, as you saw on the TV news, they came with only one suitcase of belonging, be it clothes or books or whatever they brought with them. They needed, especially those who were coming in the first weeks of the war, where it was still winter, both in Ukraine and in Poland, they needed warm clothes. They needed blankets to warm themselves up, to warm their kids up. So all the needs that were the most essential at the very beginning, also helping in tragic cases where Ukrainian women were raped by the Russian soldiers and they were leaving Ukraine, needing help, needing in dealing with the traumas. Some of them needed abortions or decided to have abortions. These were all the needs that we were providing for in the first weeks and months. At this point, the help that we're providing has shifted into more long-term help, which means that we're now looking to find apartments for the Ukrainians who are deciding to stay here for a longer period of time, although no one knows what that means, including the Ukrainians themselves. We're now trying to help them find jobs.
Maybe just to interrupt there for a second and just to remind the audience what may be obvious. Those people fleeing the Ukraine are by and large not the military eligible male population. It's women and children, senior citizens, like Andy and me. Some not as mobile as Andy and me. Some have more hair than Andy and me. So these are the people who are most vulnerable. And when Magda talks, as she does so passionately, about the needs of these people, and what they don't know is, can they ever go back? Will there be a there to go back to? Their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, their uncles, their cousins are largely engaged in the war effort. They have no idea whether they're going to survive. They live in terror every minute that they won't. And I know during my experiences at Warsaw Central, the most shocking memory I have of working in the food tent was in the midst of serving thousands of meals a day, there would at some random point be the screeching of people. And there was a protocol for dealing with that. There were pink vests. Those were the trauma counselors who immediately surrounded those people, because you knew they had received at that moment tragic news. Somebody was dead. Their house was destroyed. The village was no longer occupied. So those are the kinds of traumatic circumstances that Magda and the Jewish world and the rest of the world is helping to deal with. And Magda, as we're running a bit up against the frame of my time with you one-on-one on this, what are you worried about over the next few months the most in terms of your ability to sustain this effort?
I can share the challenges in a moment, but I wanted to share one more thing, which was, I think, one of the most surprising things that I've heard from the Ukrainian ladies that were frequently visiting our day center, for example. The feeling of guilt, the immense feeling of guilt that they carried with them, guilt for leaving their husbands, brothers, fathers in Ukraine, living and now being in relatively safe surroundings, having all that support which their families back in Ukraine did not have. Just hearing them speak about the guilt that they feel, that they carry, was just beyond overwhelming. In terms of the next few months, this is super difficult to try to imagine what might be happening with Putin being, as Putin is very unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen next. Will there be another wave of massive waves of refugees coming to Poland? Bearing in mind that winter is coming, a lot of the buildings have been destroyed, and as much as you can stay in a building that doesn't have a heating or windows, you can survive during the summer. Forget about it during the winter. Will there be massive refugee waves because of the living conditions that they will find in Ukraine? We don't know. And I think the most challenging part going forward is that unknown situation, which also translates to the Ukrainians that we already have in Warsaw, in Poland, that we work with. They don't know. A lot of them are saying, we want to go back as soon as this is going to be possible. Is this going to be possible in the next few weeks, few months at all? We don't know, they don't know, and therefore trying to think of how do we provide for their needs right now, right here, is very challenging. As I mentioned before, we're looking into finding apartments for the next few months, if not a year, for the Ukrainians, trying to find jobs for them, which became extremely difficult in the big cities, not only in Warsaw, in Krakow, but in other big cities, because empty apartments have been rented out already, jobs were found. The Ukrainians, as much as Ukrainian can be similar to Polish, if you need to direct someone and tell them where to go to find the nearest grocery store, we can manage with Ukrainian and Polish. But if we're talking about schooling, for example, or if we're talking about really for someone to get a job in Poland in Polish, not speaking Polish, this is very, very difficult. So there are a lot of challenges. And Ukrainians want that independence. When they find themselves here in Poland, they want to be self-sufficient, they want to be providing for themselves, they want to have the jobs. It's just very difficult to find these.
All right. I think we're, where do we stand on time? Faith, please. Great. Magda, we could go on each and every subject that we've talked on, and we've certainly covered quite a wide range of them. But now I'd like to end your direct participation in this until we get to the Q&A. But I'll do so by saying, you already know you have a fan club in Cleveland, and Harriet Mann is sitting in the audience here. She's one of the principal cheerleaders of the Magda Dorosh fan club in Cleveland. And now that others have seen you in action, they can understand why your fan club is so wide. I'd now like to turn to our second featured speaker, Andy Fedinsky. He is a self-described Ukrainian activist, and he comes at it through inheritance from his father, who was in fact arrested by the Nazis for that reason. And as a result, Andy was born in a DP camp in Innsbruck, Austria. So he knew something about the notion of refugee status. He came to the States as a boy, was educated here, and had several successful careers, both as a teacher, as a congressional staffer, including to Mary Rose Okar, as a lobbyist, and he's now the head thinker, which is what I'd like to call it, whatever the title is, at the Ukrainian Museum over in Tremont. And the fact that there is an institution such as Ukrainian Museum in Tremont does tell you a bit about the vibrancy and strength of the Ukrainian community in this region. So starting with that, Andy, and before we get to the humanitarian relief efforts, which are going to be the focus of our conversation, let's zoom in for a minute. Can you please give us a brief overview of the history of the Ukrainian community in this region?
Sure. First of all, thank you for the invitation and for organizing this event. On behalf of the United Ukrainian Organizations of Ohio, I need to point out that we have a long-standing friendship and partnership with the American Jewish Committee, and I see Lisi Shapiro is here. Let me focus a little bit on what this war is all about for Ukrainians and obviously for Putin and Russians. I'm going to start with a little, seems trivial, the word "the." When I was growing up, what we today call Ukraine was the Ukraine. Now, what's the difference between Ukraine and the Ukraine? The Ukraine implies it's a region of a larger country, much like the Yukon, the Midwest in the United States, the Outback in Australia. And for centuries, Ukraine was, and the Ukrainian people, Ukraine didn't exist as a state, but they were incorporated into Poland, the Russian Empire, Austrian Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire. And for the most part, particularly under Russia, this was not a very happy, in fact, it was a tragic relationship. Starting in the 17th century, Ukrainians and other peoples were subjected to a form of slavery called serfdom. And it was the ambition, political ambition of Ukrainians to have their own state. as articulated by their national poet, our national poet, Taras Shevchenko. There's a bust of him in the Cultural Gardens. There's a statue to him in Washington near DuPont Circle. Very tragically, World War I, which Magda talked about, pitted peoples against each other. And Ukrainians, along with others, Poles, of course, were partitioned between the Austrian Empire and the Russian Empire. Now, Ukrainians celebrate Christmas on January 7th, 13 days after the Christmas that we know in America. And on Christmas Eve, January 6th, there were soldiers in the Austrian army and soldiers in the Russian army, and they would sing Ukrainian Christmas carols. And then the next day, go back to killing each other. And the question was, why is this happening? Why are our young men killing each other? Well, the answer was because we don't have a state of our own. We don't have a country. And that became the primary motive for the Ukrainian people in the 20th century in its relationship with Russia. Russia banned the Ukrainian language in the 19th century. There was serfdom. Under Stalin, millions died in the artificial famine, the Holodomor. And then millions died in World War II, including 1 million Ukrainian Jews to the Nazis.
So if I can just interrupt you here just a second. As you know, I just came back from Azerbaijan.
Right.
It shares with Ukraine and with dozens of other countries, Estonia, Lithuania, Belarus, Latvia, Hungary, Romania, Bucharest, all of the stands. This incredibly complex, centuries-old history of struggle with Russia, the Soviet Union, then again with Russia. Why was this war against Ukraine so important now?
Well, Ukrainians declared their independence along with all these other countries with the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. Vladimir Putin has made it clear that he believes Ukraine should be part of the Russian, reconstituted Russian Empire. Alexander Navalny, the political prisoner who Putin poisoned, wrote an article in the Washington Post Friday where he said that the political establishment of Russia is obsessed with Ukraine and is jealous of Ukraine. That's the word he used, and wants to see them fail. Russia is a police state now, mass arrests and so on. Ukrainians are oriented and have been for a long time on Europe. They see the prosperity of Europe, the freedom, the democracy, and Putin wants to reverse that. And in fact, he expected that to happen. Kind of ironic that when the invasion first started, he sent his troops with dress uniforms. They were supposed to take over Ukraine in a week and then have a victory parade downtown Kyiv. The United States offered the president of Ukraine a ride, and he said, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." And to the astonishment of the world and Putin, Ukrainians have been resisting all that time. Now, Putin announced that he was going to denazify Ukraine, which people pointed out, That's nonsense. That's ridiculous. Ukraine has a Jewish president, whose ancestors fought in World War II against the Nazis. So Putin changed his tune. He said, well, it's to protect the Russian speakers. Most Ukrainians speak Russian freely. And I mean the word freely, not only fluently, but in terms of human rights. You want to speak Yiddish, you can speak Yiddish in Ukraine, and they do when Jews from around the world come to their ancestral villages, shtetls, to celebrate the High Holy Days. Not this year. But Friday, when Putin again changed his objective, he said it's to just bring in the four provinces, the four oblasts, the four parts of Ukraine into the Russian, he calls it Ruski Mir, the Russian world. He had this deranged speech where now he's fighting not Ukraine, he's fighting the West, he's fighting the United States, he's fighting Satan, and he used that word, that the United States is satanic. And so, how this is going to end? Well, hopefully soon.
But until it ends.
And finally, I'd like to extend to Magda how grateful we are for the generosity of the Polish people, and of course the generosity of so many other countries, including our own, of course. The United States has been extending military, humanitarian, economic aid, diplomatic aid, and here locally, you mentioned 100 students have enrolled in Parma public schools. Joe Simperman of Global Cleveland, he said there are 40 Ukrainian refugee students in Mentor, of all places, Mentor, Ohio. This morning's New York Times has an article that says, for Ukrainians who fled, aid helps rebuild shattered lives. So this is happening in New York as well.
Okay, so let's concentrate on a few details about what's going on in this community. What is the Ukrainian Association of Ohio and its various constituent organizations? What have they been doing? What are they doing to assist the refugees who are here and those who are elsewhere?
Well, soon after the war began, Governor Mike DeWine convened a conference that included the United Ukrainian Organizations of Ohio. It included Catholic Charities, it included Global Cleveland, and others.
So what are they doing?
Well, there's an organization called Cleveland Maidan. Maidan was the Revolution of Dignity. They've been using one of the Ukrainian churches as a warehouse to collect and send containers full of aid to Ukraine. There's a guy named Ihor Kovai. He's an immigrant who started a successful roofing company here in Cleveland 30 years ago. He went back to Poland to take humanitarian aid and drive it all the way across Ukraine to the Eastern Front.
So you're collecting. Kathy, do you have something you need to tell us?
Yeah. Oh, okay, sure. Okay. I'm not
showing that our clergy is so multi-talented. They can not only save our spirit, they can save us from technical demise.
John, she's young.
Yeah. Thank you,
I have to
Kenner
ask my
Sabo.
kids how to use the internet. So there are any number of local organizations, national. There's a group called Razum, which means together, based in New York, and they've raised tens of millions of dollars.
So what are they doing with the money?
Humanitarian aid, you know, the hospital equipment. There's Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur is organizing shipments to Germany, and then they send them. So Ingrid Bublis, the honorary consul of Lithuania, said she was going to be here, but the Lithuanians are doing an event today and collecting clothing and money for people to endure the winter. There's food needs and shelter, etc.
So what about, that is all the collection of goods and material to provide humanitarian aid to those who are dislocated either within the Ukraine or wherever they might be in the neighboring states. What about here in this community? Who's in charge? Is there anyone in charge, and what are they doing?
Yes, the United Ukrainian Organizations is working with the groups that I just mentioned, and obviously collecting money and material, the Cleveland Maidan Association as well. Global Cleveland is helping to find housing for people, and people in the community are opening their doors to Ukrainian refugees. The school systems, there's a Ukrainian immigrant from the Donbass region, Anastasia, who's organizing English lessons for Ukrainian refugees. It's at the Cuyahoga County Library. There was an interesting article that kind of points out the differences between how the Russian military and society contrasts with Ukrainian. When Russia invaded, people in every village of Ukraine, every town, every street started putting up tank barricades, where the Russians were waiting to be told what to do.
Yeah.
The same thing happened in various communities, not just in Cleveland, but around the world. Well, throughout the United States. But my daughter was recently, she spent 5 or 6 weeks in Australia, and she said, you know, the Ukrainian community in Australia is doing what we're doing here in Cleveland and Parma.
Yeah.
The Ukrainian community in Argentina, in Brazil. And it's not just the Ukrainians, allies, for example, what we're doing here.
So, one last question before we get on to the broader Q&A.
Sure.
Of those Ukrainians who are coming to this region, who have employment skills, are they finding jobs? Is the community, are they able to get permission to work, and are employers willing to hire them?
I can't speak in detail to that. I can speak anecdotally. I got a phone call months ago from a restaurateur who has a string of restaurants here in Cleveland. He says, I'm desperate for workers. You know, I need dishwashers, and so on. A lot of the people, well, first of all, most of them are women and children. And I was going to mention Igor Kovai, the roofer. He came back to Cleveland for a couple weeks. I met him for coffee, and then he said he was going back to Ukraine to continue driving the material that is being collected here. And I said, well, when are you coming back to Cleveland? And he says, when the war's over.
Yeah.
And so that is being repeated millions of times around the world. And it's inspiring, and it's also very scary and tragic, because tens of thousands of people, if not more, have already died.
Yeah. I'd like now to move to the ultimate goal of this program, which is to provide some guidance to individuals who might be so inclined as to what they can do to help. And that is, especially at this time of year in this synagogue, probably our moral command, that we reflect on that possibility.
By the way, John, is it too late to wish you a Happy New Year?
Not at all.
Happy New Year.
Not at all. Not at all. So I'd like to introduce the senior representative of the American Jewish community, Lisi Shapiro, who is a member of this congregation. And I'd like to make arrangements for Cantor Sabo to turn over the microphone so that she may briefly describe what the AJC has been doing and what people who are here today or online can do to assist your efforts.
Hi, thank you so much. And Andy, it's always good to see you. And Andy just spoke to a group of high schoolers at B'nai Yeshurun on Rosh Hashanah. So I think John gave me a title that's a lot bigger than who and what I am. I'm the regional director of the American Jewish Committee as opposed to the community here. And AJC has a long history of working on this issue and with the Ukrainian community. What Andy and I have joked about is that we have a decades-long and generations-deep relationship. And it is, AJC was the first Jewish organization to call for independence the first go-around. And we have had an office in Kiev, we have an office in Warsaw, and we work together with many here. I think you should know that the chairperson or the executive director of the international Ukrainian community is Andy Fute, who is a Clevelander who we all know and love, and we have been working with him and with Marta for years. David Heller has become the chair of the National JFNA Fund. AJC has a fund. Israel Aid was on the ground almost immediately. And I think that when you asked about needs, the needs have changed over this time. It started out with medical equipment and larger things. So what can we do? On an advocacy front, I know that we have an advocacy alert. We need to keep pressure on our congressional officers to continue to provide military aid, humanitarian aid, and so forth. If you would like to sign on to AJCs, it's at ajc.org. Under our action page, I believe JFNA has one as well. In terms of Cleveland, I spoke with Joe Simperman recently from Global Cleveland, and I'm in touch with Marta. There was just a huge shipment that the Ukrainian community has just sent over. I understand that there are 1,500 individuals here on various forms of visas from the Ukraine living in Northeast Ohio. They are predominantly in Parma and North Royalton, but as Andy said, there are families now in Mentor. Part of that is because over 500 people have offered their homes. So that's happening. They need English translators. And we can continue to provide you and the congregation with information about how you can assist locally. Dollars can go through JFNA, through AJC, through Global Cleveland. I believe that Maidan and the Ukrainian community here is also accepting that. And MedWish has been doing a lot.
And what about people who don't want to just write a check? What about people who want to get their hands dirty, so to speak, and do something beyond just donating money? Where do they go to find an outlet for their interest? Do they go to you? Do they go to you, Andy? Please, let's give some very practical, or try to give some very practical guidance.
There's well, first of all, if you just Google aid to Ukraine, you'll see lots and lots of potential targets, although I would caution that some of these are scams.
Right,
People
right.
raising money for their pocket. But if you go to Cleveland Maidan, Cleveland, the word Cleveland, and MAIDAN .info, and they have a very extensive website. They've got about 30 volunteers or more, I don't know. And you can help, go there and help pack. There are people from the so-called older immigration and then the new immigration. Lisi mentioned Medwish. Those of you who have connections, and you don't have to have a connection, but to Cleveland's medical community. What Medwish does is they take discontinued medical equipment that is perfectly serviceable, perfectly good, and they send it to Ukraine. And as I mentioned, Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur is...
So for those who are in attendance now, we're just passing out the list that you provided, Andy, and I want to come back to Magda because I don't want to overlook a chance to give her input on this issue. This list that is being passed out that you provided, Andy, what is it a list of?
Local, Cleveland Maidan, United Ukrainian Organizations of Cleveland, Global Cleveland, those are local. National, Razom, the Jewish National Fund. Lisi just mentioned the American Jewish Committee. And if you go to these websites, you'll see that there's a tab, How to Help Ukraine. So if you're working, let's say, with UNICEF, if that's your preference, there'll be a tab there.
But we can also find by pursuing these instructions, or perhaps even by direct contact for people in this congregation who already know you, Lisi. I'm not trying to add to the inbox mail you get, but if somebody says, I want to help, they can be in touch with you?
I'm always happy to help direct people. We are not doing direct humanitarian aid as AJC. However, we work with Global Cleveland, and we work with Marta's organization, the Ukrainian community. The Ukrainian community here in Cleveland has been very open to receiving goods and services, but again, those have changed. I will get you some information that you can share, but
With faith is the counterpoint here.
but I think that as we get into winter, that there are all these kids in schools who speak no English. And so they're trying to teach English, they're working on visa issues, they need lawyers, and they need homes. So we'll get you that.
All right, Magda, I promise to come back to you, and I'm grateful for your patience. You're not in the same position to answer this question because no one can do something as silly as I did and get on an airplane and come to Warsaw, although it's an easy thing to do for any so inclined. What do you suggest to people who are interested in doing more than they may already do? And you're welcome, as I indicated, to do a money raise for Hello Poland. That may be the best way that people can support your individual efforts, but more broadly than that, what do you have to say about this question?
The way to get involved is donate the funds. This is the first, the most efficient way to get involved. And the funds raised from all over the world we can spend here in Poland for the very specific needs of the people. At the beginning, it was just buying clothes in whatever size, whatever type of clothing. At this point, we have much more specific needs, like a coat size, this or that, shoe size, this or that for the kids, or a wheelchair, a very specific wheelchair for a disabled child that we have within our circles. But if you want to do more than donating money, and if you happen to travel to to Poland, come and visit the refugee centers, either the generally run or the ones run by the Jewish community. The refugees need to remember that they are not forgotten, that the whole world still cares for them, as this is something that's going on for 7-8 months. We don't know how much longer this is going to take. We know that Ukrainian crisis is not so much on the news, but the people and their needs are still here. So come and visit our Jewish organizations if you happen to be in Poland, to support us as well. We need the support as well. We've been doing the very gratifying but immensely overwhelming work for the last few months, and it's taking a toll on us as well. If you happen to plan winter break and you would like to come to Poland, we'll be organizing a 2 weeks winter program for the kids like we did in the summer. We will do that in February as well, especially if you speak Russian or Ukrainian and are willing to dedicate 2 weeks of your time to help us with the programming. We certainly welcome such initiatives. If you have books in Russian or Ukrainian on Jewish topics, or movies that we can distribute to the families, or organize community centers for them where they can come together and watch these movies, read these books, that would be also very, very helpful.
All right. I have proven, once again, to be very frail at recognizing people through masks. Someday I'll get over that frailty, but hopefully it won't be longer required. And as a result, I just now noticed that Greg Levine, our fellow congregant, is in the audience, and he has a special role to play in all of this. So let me pass the mic over to him. I will say very briefly in the last word about Magda, anyone who's interested in supporting her efforts through a direct contribution to Hello Poland, be in touch with me. There's a special way to do that. I know what it is, and I'll be happy to share that information. And so I'd like our concluding comments really to come from Greg, who's going to describe more about what his involvement is on behalf of the Federation, the Jewish Federation of Cleveland.
Thank you. By the way, if you've not been to the Ukrainian Museum at Tremont, it's a must. It's a hidden gem. I've had a personal tour from Andy, and it is just remarkable. It's a treasure that Cleveland hosts. It's a international treasure, so visit if you have a chance. So a couple things that I wanted to mention.
Greg, could I just comment about that?
Sure. Maybe if you're really nice, you'll get the VIP tour and see the vault where the treasures are really hidden.
Nobody was particularly interested in the Ukrainian Museum archives in Cleveland with all the treasures until Ukraine became independent. After independence, the editor of one of Ukraine's leading literary magazines came and he said, "My God, what you have here, we don't have this in Ukraine." And I had the occasion to think about that, because he said, the time will come when Ukraine will tell you to ship it all back to Ukraine. And he says, you don't dare do that for 2 generations to make sure that independence is for real and enduring. And then now I read and see how Russia is deliberately destroying libraries, universities, and schools, hospitals, of course. So thanks for letting me interrupt.
All right, so Greg, again, the focal point here is what can people here in the audience, listening online, what can they do to help? What activities can you direct them to?
So a couple things. It's been mentioned many, many times about donating money. So I just want to add, we happen to be at this very time in the middle of the Federation's campaign. And for this campaign, the Mandel Foundation has said that anyone who gives a new pledge or anyone who gives an incremental pledge from what they gave last year, that money would directly go to the Ukrainian Ethiopian Emergency Rescue Fund, which in part supports Hillel in Krakow and other places. So any increase that you give or new donation to that campaign goes directly to that fund. You can donate directly to that fund if you like as well. In the Community Relations Committee at the Jewish Federation, actually, when the crisis happened with Afghanistan, so many people in the community said, what can I do to volunteer to do work? And so we actually have a volunteer request form through the Community Relations Committee of the Federation where you fill it out and then we match you to your skills and helping in the community. Much of the work has to do with Afghanistan. It also will hopefully soon have to do with what's going on in Ukraine. I, for one, every Thursday morning, I love doing this. I go, it's called Building Hope in the City. It's one of the many organizations that helps with refugees or people seeking asylum. And I help people study to pass their citizenship test. We also are helping people who just came to this country who are working on English. It's through Tri-C and through the libraries. So if you're interested in doing that, it could be one day a week, it could be twice a week, it could be one day a month. Again, I would suggest you go onto the Federation's website, and that Federation website is very easy. It's jewishcleveland.org. If you go all the way to the bottom, it says donate, and you can donate. Or if you go to Community Relations Committee, we'll connect you with potential opportunities to do hands-on volunteering. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
That is like the $64 zillion answer to the question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Faith has an idea as to whether this congregation might try to adopt a family to support. Is that something Greg or Lisi or you, Andy, could help us do? If Faith could get a group around that effort?
I think we can. I would recommend contacting Joe Simperman at Global Cleveland. They have an inventory of folks who, as Lisa mentioned,
Families up for adoption, so to speak. Yeah.
Well,
No, I don't mean that in any joking sense. These are seriously desperate people.
yes, they are.
Who need help. I've had lots of contact with people I've met through my time in Warsaw Central, Ukrainians who are trying to get here. It is a mind-bogglingly difficult, nearly impossible task that only gets harder once they actually get here. So, yes, Kathy, do you have something to say?
First of all, if anyone in the congregation, those of you who are here today, those who are watching live stream, and we can certainly get the word out through our Facebook page, our Temple E-Times, and maybe even the Temple Times. If anyone is interested in getting a group together and going to visit the Ukrainian Museum in Tremont, we would love to become more in tune, more educated.
Please do.
And we'd love to partner with you if members of your community would love to, after that, come and be our guest at the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage. I know we can work out an exchange like that as well. Have you? Wonderful. Aside from the monetary donations, for those of us, and probably everyone in the room can relate, for those of us who look in our closets and know that we have too much, and we're very, very lucky to have too much in our closets, given the season, if we want to bring sweaters, boots, coats, anything you can imagine for the winter, are there any more shipments going out from the Ukrainian community where we can bring our warmest clothes that we may no longer be using, that somebody else could use, that could be sent over there?
I bet there are, and I would, again, recommend Cleveland Maidan or Fund to Aid Ukraine. But Cleveland Maidan, they're using the auditorium at one of our churches as a warehouse, and they keep shuttling things over.
All right, and we can maybe coordinate with our social action committee whether those.
If there's medical equipment, I broke my hip a couple years ago, and so the walker that I was using is now in Ukraine somewhere. Thank God I don't need it, but somebody else does.
So medical equipment like that as well can be shipped?
MedWish.
Okay.
We're at the time that I said we would try to aim to be over, but I don't want to cut off questions that may be extant from the audience, so may we proceed to that?
Sure, and before we take the first question, do you have a follow-up, Lisi? One moment, we won't hear you on the live stream. One moment, and then we'll go to you, Barbara.
I was just texting with Global Cleveland, and they're more than happy to help you navigate adopting a family.
Good to know. Barbara?
The High Lifers would be delighted to organize a trip to see the museum and experience the museum. So this is a commitment. I just don't know how in this moment to make it happen, but it'll happen.
Sure.
And I would love to be a part of adopting a family.
Anyone else have a question for Andy or for Magda or for John?
Let me just say, in follow up to one of the comments that Greg made, there is indeed already a massive fundraising effort underway at the Jewish Federations of North America. David Heller, our local, will be in charge of that. But that effort is raising money for Ukraine, raising money for Ethiopia, and raising money for Russians. And much of that money, as far as I understand, will be devoted to trying to help people get out, as opposed to helping those that are stranded deal with the desperate circumstances that they find themselves.
John, I've just
Please.
made a new friend. Her name is Larissa. She's a member of our Ukrainian community. She has a comment that she wants to share with everyone.
I do. Hi, thank you. Sure. Just to build on what Andy was saying about the fantastic work of the Cleveland Maidan Association, the first organization on that list that was passed out, they have a number of initiatives, and two specific ones recently have been to fund the shipment of transportation vehicles. These are vehicles that are taking this humanitarian aid where it's needed, you know, to the soldiers, to the people in towns that have been unable to escape. There have been so many of these vehicles that have been deliberately struck by Russian gunfire and destroyed. And so these transportation vehicles not only bring aid to where it's needed, but also get wounded soldiers or civilians out of those areas to try and get them to a field hospital or traditional hospital, the ones that are still existing and functioning. So just to underscore, while all of us, me included, love to do something hands-on, I just wanted to point out that how a donation, you know, it doesn't have to be a large one, all the small ones add up, but what those go to fuel, what those donations make happen. So the Cleveland Maidan has purchased vehicles and shipped them over there to replace ones that have been destroyed. And another recent initiative of Cleveland Maidan is that they are partnering with a bioengineering company that makes prosthetics. And these prosthetics are being created and completed in a shorter amount of time than usual. And these prosthetics are going to both soldiers and civilians, children, teenagers, adults that have been maimed, that have lost a limb to mines and explosives that have been left in the field. So just to give you, again, to underscore what's already been said about Cleveland Maidan, they're local. They've been around since 2014. While there are a lot of terrific ad hoc efforts, Cleveland Maidan has been around since 2014, and they have their official 501c3 nonprofit designation. So just to give you extra faith, everyone wants to know their donations going to someplace legit. They are more than legit. They are the rock stars of Cleveland, I would say.
And I should add that 100% of donations go to Ukraine.
Yes.
They've purchased at least a dozen ambulances and sent them over there. And I might also add that Larissa is a distinguished writer. She has a recent article in Politico about her grandmother and other publications. So she's also one of our unsung heroes here in our community.
Larissa, we're really happy that you took time on a Sunday afternoon to come and visit with us and to help us, you know, for so many who are willing. It's a bewildering array of possibilities. Do I click this button? Do I go on that button? Do I trust these people? Do I know these people? to come in here and help us not only identify, but prioritize. That really is a massive contribution to the goal of this program. So we're glad that you made it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I, in the first weeks of the war, I shared the bewilderment, analysis paralysis. Where do I donate? Where is it needed? So finding Cleveland Maidan was a fantastic discovery for me too, to see that they have the official 501c3 nonprofit designation. They've been doing this they've been doing their work since 2014 when Eastern Ukraine was invaded. I personally know one of the board of directors. So yes, you can have faith, and I give you a vote of confidence in their fantastic work. The
Thank you.
prosthetics being the most recent.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We have a question here. Question? Okay, let me come to you.
I'm James Lieberman. I just gave the message to Greg about federation, which I solicit for. I did some calls this morning. Any increase or new pledge is actually matched, and the match goes to Ukraine.
To the Ukraine fund that is
So
distributed over the three causes.
You increase your annual gift, you double your impact.
Right.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jim. Anyone else have questions? I'm fascinated today to be reminded, I'm so keenly aware of the Jewish journey, the journey of the Jewish people and the journey of the Ukrainian people. There are so many similarities and mirrored images. And, I was just wondering if I could ask one question of Magda. You might have to unmute yourself, Magda, but I'm curious, in Warsaw, have you seen Jews of a certain age, perhaps in their 80s or 90s, who were in Poland at one time in their life and in an effort to either escape the Nazis or perhaps they were fortunate to survive the camps, went back to Ukraine or escaped to Ukraine and now have been brought back to Poland? Are you having any of the Jews who survived the horrors of of the camps of Nazism, have you seen any of them coming back to Poland as they were having to leave Ukraine, and what the impact on those people have been?
I don't know if that question got through. Is anybody able to tell us? Magda, did you hear Cantor Sibo's question?
Not really.
Can you hear me
good.
now?
If you could
Then let
repeat
me
the
try
question.
All right, John, take it away.
Let me try to summarize it. Cantor Sibo's question was, in those Jews that are currently in Poland, have you seen any of the age group, whether they have migrated from the Ukraine or otherwise, who were survivors of the Holocaust era? Or are those people all in Israel or wherever they are? That's the question.
So there certainly were a few dozen, I would say, of Holocaust survivors. As far as I know, most of them were transiting Poland to go to Israel. At some point, they needed to stay for a little bit longer because of different health issues. But the majority of the survivors that I know of who made to Poland went to Israel because their children or their relatives were in Israel, and this is where they wanted to go, including like 5 people that went to Israel, a couple 96, 97 years old that were taken from Warsaw, or actually not Warsaw, from Przemyśl to Israel on a private plane by one of the donors from Israel who decided to send his private plane to get them as fast as possible and in the most comfortable way possible from Poland to Israel.
Thank you, Magda. Any last questions or comments before I have John close? John, you spent a lot of time thanking people, and we, of course, Faith Schaefer, what a gem. But we got to take a moment to thank you, John, because without you.
Thank you. Thank you. Magda? It's
Yes.
time for you to do whatever else you would do on Sunday night at this time, which is get ready for what will, especially this week, be a busy week. I'm sure you haven't made your gefilte fish or your chicken soup yet. Get about it, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation.
Our immense pleasure. Our immense pleasure. Okay, cut it. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
John, do you know how